Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to another quick Surface session. We've just had a large Microsoft event yesterday to which I wasn't invited this time. But regardless, I still watched with extreme interest to see what they're going to throw at us this time. And what did we see? Well, the rumours were of a Surface phone, of a Surface Pro 5 and a Surface Book 2. And we saw none of these things. No, but what we did see was the only a little bit leaked Surface Studio. There was also a lot of stuff about the Creators update coming in 2017 to Windows 10, which looked mighty interesting, but the focus was definitely on drawing, was on art, was on visual arts, taking something from 2D through to 3D, through to augmented and virtual realities and back again, which was all kind of really very cool, but not really much to do with making music. I mean, there were glimpses. There were glimpses of Bitwig just flashing through. There was something new and strange called Groove Maker or something. We don't know. There was talk of the man behind StaffPad, but no actual StaffPad. So, as a musician, we feel a little bit perhaps passed over, ignored and hard done by in favour of all these people who are drawing stuff. So there wasn't really a lot of love for the musicians. However, the Surface Studio as a product does look extremely interesting. And although it wasn't pushed towards us, it could definitely be repurposed for music production. I mean, honestly, the Surface Studio has just made the Apple iMac obsolete. I mean, the iMac is arguably one of the most common project studio computers that you'll see. You see them everywhere, popped up in studios, this lovely screen thing with a big fat Apple on it, just to remind you of the product that you're using. It has enough power, it has enough poke to run a decent sized studio, decent sized projects with virtual instruments and effects and all that jazz. Now the Surface Studio brings a better screen, a much thinner bezel, a brighter visual experience and some better performance, but that's not really it. That's not why the Surface range in its entirety is interesting as a platform for music making. What is interesting is the immersive Surface experience of creating and interacting with your computer in a different way, in a way that other than on the iPad, Apple seemed to have completely ignored. I've been banging on about this since I had the Surface Pro 3, and let me try to demonstrate on my Surface Pro 4 here. Using a mouse is all very well. You can sit back and you can use this mouse where all your creativity, all your focus, all your energy is passing through a single tiny point of your body here, where you're moving a little finger and you're moving your little hand. That's it. That's all you've got. I mean, as a musician, why do we put up with that? I mean, I wouldn't play a guitar in that way. I wouldn't play a guitar with a single finger and a single tiny movement. I would grasp the instrument and play the thing. And yet our most creative space, the computer, the place where perhaps we put all our creativity, is controlled with this single tiny little action. I mean, we've become so used to it that we don't quite understand how restrictive it is. Because it is. So what the Surface brings is this ability to break out from the mouse straitjacket. And okay, you can go to a single point on a pen, but that's not all you're doing. So I can sit back and mouse, and I can create, for instance, automation in Pro Tools like I've got here. But with the pen, I can move into my project a bit more, and I can focus on what I'm doing. And then, once I've chosen the appropriate tool, I can draw fine automation, either really close in and detailed or further away, and it's a natural thing to do because we write all the time, and it's a natural feel to what you're doing. And then I can get my fingers involved if I want to do more with that. I can edit with my fingers or another finger. I can browse through tracks and move things around. And this whole time I am directly involved in the project. I'm not sat back on a big overview, although that can sometimes be good. I am involved and immersed in what's going on. And that's why the Surface is awesome. That's why the Surface range is or rather has, this enormous potential for creativity. I mean, it's obvious when you're drawing in artwork, moving things about, that surface style I'll talk about in a minute, all those sorts of things are very obvious, but in music production it can be too, because we like hardware, we like external boxes, things that we can touch, things that we can move. And those seem to be appearing once again around our computers because we want to do that. And the surface environment brings and feeds into that because it allows you to reach out your hand to do things. It allows you to touch your projects and your music in ways that a mouse never can. The only frustration you find, or rather the only problem you find in entering into the surface space, is that not all software really responds to that very well. So in Pro Tools, I've got single touch, which is great. I mean, I bring up the mixer and I can move faders, I can bring up plugins, and I can move things in there with a single finger or with a pen. That's great, but you can sometimes hit into frustration where if I'm using the pen and I don't perhaps have my keyboard here, then trying to get up to a fiddly little menu here to do something can be frustrating. Because the manufacturers, the producers, Avid for instance, on this case of Pro Tools, haven't grasped what the Surface can offer and haven't seen that there actually is another way of interacting with their software that doesn't have to be a single point of a mouse. So Microsoft seemed to understand this as well, and they mentioned how they've talked to people who use the pen, and the Surface Dial seemed to come out of that conversation. The problem I have when using the pen is the lack of access to common commands and keyboard shortcuts. I mean, when you're into the computer like you would be with the Surface Studio, you're using the pen, you don't necessarily have access to keyboard shortcuts. They're going to be on far away and they're going to sort of bring you back out of the way that you're engaging with the computer. And we don't want that. I want to stay in there. And so access to simple commands is what interests me. And my criticism of the pen is that there's no toolbar that allows you to set up simple shortcuts and commands that you would use all the time. And so I use something called Toolbar Creator, which I have here, which is a toolbar of keyboard shortcuts that allows me to do various things. So for instance, just very simply, if I go to the end of this, I can select something. I can go copy, and then I can put the thing over here, and I can go paste very simply just on a toolbar, rather than having to try to find it under a menu here, which with the pen or with a finger is difficult. So I'm disappointed that they haven't seen that. But the Surface Dial certainly looks very interesting. It could be used for all sorts of things. Of course, scrolling about in your project. It could be used, as I was drawing in automation here, with my pen tool. That's awesome. However, it's more awesome to have something playing back and adjusting a knob to draw that automation in as it's playing back. That gives you a much better expressive performance. We do that already with synthesizers and knobs and bits and pieces over MIDI. However, something next to your system, a universal knob to rule them all, is a pretty awesome thing. We've already seen it. We've seen this in some hardware manufacturers. I think, is it Mackie that have one, UAD that have one on their device, the new Control Master from Touch Innovations, all there to give you this tactile control over parameters on screen. And the Surface Dial definitely feeds into that idea, so that's amazing. The bit when they picked it up and stuck it on the screen, that was phenomenal. What a thing. How can we use that in music production? How could that best be used? It might be interesting, for instance, to slap that on the screen, and then with a finger you can select which parameter you're going to edit. So you could bring up a GUI for a software instrument or an effect. You can slap the Surface Dial on it and it would map itself to the selected parameter. That would be rather groovy. There's got to be more we can do than just turn volume up and down and scroll through windows. Potential there could be awesome. However, it doesn't really matter how great the Surface Studio looks. It doesn't matter how much potential it has. What actually matters is whether it's going to work with audio hardware and audio software. These things are critical. There's a fair bit of multi-touch music software out there now. FL Studio, Bitwig, for instance, instantly jump to mind. And things like Cubase and Pro Tools work well on a single touch. So there's a lot of good stuff. that the Surface Studio could take advantage of immediately. I don't really want to hear about Windows 10 apps because they're going to be using onboard sound. They're not going to have access to ASIO drivers. So they may be good and funky and fun, but they're not going to be serious and they're not going to be low enough latency to use properly. So what I'm talking about is proper desktop software, because after all, the flipping Surface is a computer, yeah? It's a real Windows desktop computer. We don't need to be fanning around with Windows 10 apps. What we need is proper software, Cubase, Pro Tools, running with proper bits of audio hardware. And that's where the question mark always lies. They talked a lot about ink flow and how CAD people using CAD software want no lag when they're manipulating 3D objects and designing. Well, we want that too. We want no lag in our audio. We want a system which is going to be stable enough and powerful enough to maintain the playback of multiple streams of audio while processing effects, while generating sounds from virtual instruments. We want the whole thing. We want all of that going on at once, and that's the sort of thing that a desktop computer can handle. But can the Surface Studio handle it? We don't know. Probably. I mean, the specs seem good, but although we don't really know whether it's a desktop processor or a mobile processor. It's 6th generation i7, which could mean either at the moment. We don't know the chipset of the internal motherboard, for instance. However, the specs themselves do seem to be on the good side, so there's every hope that it's going to cope with these things well. But as we've seen with the Surface Pro 4 and the Surface Pro 3, some things can work really, really well. With the Surface Pro 3, you plug stuff in and it worked. Surface Pro 4, you plug stuff in and it may work. It may need a bit of jiggling. Some things do, some things don't. And that's down to the power of the processor and the ability of that processor to get its processing to the road quick enough and seamlessly enough without trying to step down and get out of the way all the time. When you're making art, the processing can be far more loose. It doesn't need to be there in an instant. For music technology, it does, and it needs to be always on, and it needs to be constant and stable. And that's the questions that we haven't yet had answered with the Surface Studio. If we look at the ports it's got 4 USB 3 ports. Hooray! Yeah-ish. I mean, that's 4 times the ports that the Surface Pro 4's got, so that's a good thing. But where's the USB 3.1? Where's Thunderbolt 3? I mean, there's an Apple event today where they're going to be probably refreshing the MacBook Pro line and they're going to be full of USB 3.1 ports. It's the next generation port. It's kind of what the Surface Studio should have had. I don't understand the thinking. Similarly with Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt is just starting to catch on Windows. It's just starting to get interesting. And it would have been awesome to have that supported by the Surface Studio. Alas, no, we have USB ports. That's all right. I mean, the majority of stuff is going to work on that, but they could have partnered up with someone like Focusrite or Universal Audio or RME. You know, I mean, can you imagine if they'd worked with Focusrite on their amazing looking Red 8 Pre, for instance, which is a Thunderbolt interface, and they could have worked in getting that running perfectly with Windows 10 on the Surface Studio. You could then be piping in 64 channels of audio or 32 channels of Dante or 8 channels of microphone inputs. All these things could have been running through their machine looking awesome and demonstrating how Microsoft can grab hold of that ground that's full of disillusioned Apple users. It's there for the taking, you know. People want a good, high-quality computer that's going to solve their studio problems. And Apple's sort of disinterest in that user base is an opportunity for Microsoft to step in and say, here you go, here's a fantastic computer. And we've worked with people in Pro Audio to make sure that it's awesome, not just for people who draw, not for the artists and the doodlers, but for the music makers, for the noodlers, for people who play with audio, for people who want to record an orchestra into their computer, not just write dots on a line. That's what I'd like to see. But at the moment, Microsoft don't seem to have that vision. They're happy to say, look, we've got a great notation program in StaffPad which is only 18 months old. They're happy to show Bitwig as the all-encompassing music making program for touch, which is also a year old. There could be so much more. So, you know, as it stands, we really have no idea whether the Surface Studio is going to be any good for music or not. It could be, should be, and potentially it's awesome because it's a desktop computer. That's the idea. It's a desktop computer that also offers an amazingly immersive way of interacting with software and Windows 10. It doesn't automatically change your non-touch software into touchable software, but it does provide a different way of interacting with it. And there are increasing numbers of multi-touch controller software out there, like the ones from Yecco and YMIDI and DTouch, that can provide the multi-touch overlay for the software that you're using. Or just get stuck into using the software in a different way, which allows you to be creative differently. But that's what the Surface Studio can offer. It can offer an engaging and fascinating and completely unique way of interacting with your software. I mean, what's not to like about that? But ultimately, it has to work. I mean, the Surface Pro 4 can work in the right set of circumstances with the right software and the right hardware and the right tweaking. But for the Surface Studio to take off as a Pro Audio device or a Project Studio device, it has to work. It has to be a done deal. It can't be something that you have to tweak and fudge with and mess with and work around in order to get to function correctly. It just has to do it. So the Surface Studio, what an awesome thing. I mean, pricey, yes. Powerful, yes. Fantastic screen and what it offers in the way that you can engage with your software. I love it. I think it's a fantastic product. Much better than I imagined when the photos were leaked and when they talked about having an all-in-one. It's kind of like, nah, an all-in-one, yeah. But no, I mean, that's fabulous. I'd love to get my hands on one. So Microsoft, if it is creativity that you're interested in, well then send it to me and I can demonstrate creativity on an enormous scale. I'll take it down to my local cathedral and record the choir. I will plug in rock bands. I will create soundscapes and environmental sounds and bleeps and beeps and loops and musical masterpieces. I will plug it in through DC coupling into analog synthesis and get it to run an entire rig of stuff. Live performance, studio. I mean, that name, Surface Studio, is so tantalizingly annoying if it's only about art studios. Why can it not be about recording studios? But we won't know until we try. So Microsoft, send me one and I will try it out and I will champion it and I will show how it can work and what it can't do, because that's what we need to know. Producers and musicians need to be able to make an informed choice on something which is going to be running their entire studio. So the Surface Studio, yeah, good job. New Surface Books, yeah, more powerful Surface Books, yeah, great, I'm sure they're great. I still haven't had one, Microsoft still haven't lent me one. I'm still awaiting the arrival of the loaner unit and I've almost given up hope. But maybe one day we'll be able to test the Surface Book and see what its audio capabilities are compared to the Surface Pro 4. That would be awesome. Let's do that sometime. The Creative Update, all the updates to Windows, they look great. I love all of that stuff. Yeah, great, but nothing particularly for us guys. So that'll do. More videos coming really soon on what I'm doing with the Surface Pro 4 at the moment. I've just been extraordinarily busy. It's been half term. I've had kids all over the place. It's just chaos. So in the meantime, go make some tunes.